Now if you say, I'm never going to use Morse code, oh, then you'll never be able to use that part of the band, that's all. See, it's restricted to people who like Morse code. 2-meter band. How big is that band? Well, it goes from 144 to 148. But again, in the bottom point, 0.1 megahertz, there's no FM, and it's only Morse code. See, this question tells you about the CW Morse.
CW is Morse code?
Yeah, that's the abbreviation for continuous wave.
Okay.
Now, how would you know what that abbreviation was if I didn't just give you the answer?
I wouldn't.
Yes, you would. The very last piece of paper in your charts is all the acronyms. And hopefully, if you were to go to that piece of paper, you'll see CW and say continuous wave, abbreviation for Morse code. Okay, and then this other band, the 222 to 225, at the bottom 0.34 is no FM. So there's 5 questions, okay? Subbands. Okay, more about frequencies. There's only one question you got to memorize. The FCC question tool now uses the term band plan as something beyond restricted subband. Then I call things something band plans. Okay. So the term, and this is their question, the term band plan refers to a voluntary guide which takes the FCC definition of operating modes into a lower level of certain bands. Well, what does that mean? The FCC says you can only use Morse code here. On the rest of the band, do what you want. Well, it turns out that most hams realize that, gee whiz, we don't want people with what we call repeaters everywhere else. If you want to go on data modes, we'd kind of like you to hang out over here, not over here on these frequencies. So the amateur radio community has come up with what we call voluntary plans. So a voluntary band plan makes efficient use of the amateur spectrum. Don't worry about how it did that. These band plans were developed by the amateur radio community. And within the band plans is defining where the repeater frequencies are, the simplex frequencies, and we'll talk about that after, and other stuff, okay? So it's all done by the local ham saying, it's kind of like saying, if we had 4 lanes on a freeway, let's just put the slower car, the government says, hey, you got 4 lanes, use them. And we'd say, well, let's just make sure that the slow cars and the trucks are in the right-hand lane, and a little bit faster in this lane. That's like band plans. Okay. Frequency. If you remember you may not remember, but I think in section 1 or 2, I showed you a copy of my license, and it said I have primary privileges, which means I have the first priority to use the frequency. When I go on an amateur band, and there's a frequency I can use, I have first priority. What does that mean? It doesn't mean if you're a ham and I'm a ham, I can do it and you can't. What it means is we share certain frequencies with other functions. Like, for instance, the FCC issues licenses to people who have boats, maritime operators. But they don't pass a test. They just apply and they get a piece of paper and says you can use this frequency. Okay. A lot of those frequencies are inside the bands that we use. But I have primary on my license. They have secondary on theirs, which means if I want to use a frequency, I have the right to use it, and they have to go somewhere else. Okay? That's what primary secondary means. Okay. So a secondary privilege means a primary privilege station has the priority. Your amateur radio license will say primary privilege, but what they don't tell you, unless you read this question pool, sometimes we share frequencies with other primary privileges, operating things. And depending on who they are, we get secondary. And this is what you never find out unless you're in this question pool. So here's 2 examples. Here's a station that's a primary, station X. And I'll give you an example in a minute. And here's a station, here's amateurs, and because of who X is, and I'll tell you who X is in a minute, all of a sudden we became secondary. Okay? Now, let me tell you who X is. Up in the center of California, off of Route 99, in a little town called Delano. So it's not too far from Fresno. A little town called Delano. If you ever go up there, on the left side of the road, you know, these giant antennas, 400, 500, 600 feet wide, 400 feet high, wires, the whole thing. This was a thing called Voice of America Pacific. So back in the war, the U.S. would transmit, but the audience was way over in the western side of the Pacific Ocean. And they were trying to get information to different islands and people who lived over there. Well, it turns out to be a frequency that when I use my 100 watts, my 100 watts won't make it over there because they're using 1,000,000 watts. My 100 watts would never interfere. That audience would never hear my 100 watts. Now, if you and I were talking here locally, we hear each other. So, amateurs can use the frequency if they don't cause interference to the primary stations. It says users, but they mean listeners. Okay? So just accept that as a rule. Now, let's assume, though, that the primary station is, I'll give you a stupid example, a local fire station or police station that are on the same frequencies that we use. Then amateurs move to another frequency if we cause interference to their users. So if they're close to us, we're going to have to move. If their audiences are far, far, far away, we don't have to move. Okay? So memorize the answer, don't worry about it. And practically speaking, with your license, technician license, you will not encounter this. This happens with the general class license for the most part. Okay, a little bit more. It says, as noted, hams share frequencies with other user groups, as people who are not amateur radio operators. If you're operating on this band, 23 centimeter band, that's the 1240 to 1300 megahertz, and you're interfering with a radio location that's outside the U.S., now this is a crazy question, I don't know where they come up with this. You need to stop operating and take the steps to eliminate your interference. I've never heard of this. Now, let's try to give an example. Let's say that I live close to the Mexican border, and there's some function down there, some radio thing that's going on that's in the middle of my band. Well, if they're also primary, and if they can't move frequencies, then I have to move. That's what it's saying. But basically, if I'm interfering with some function, radio function outside the U.S., I have to stop. With your license, these kind of radios, you'd have to be within 5 or 10 miles of a border to even get across the border with these radios. So here in LA, forget it. Unless you're close to the Canadian border, close to the Mexican border, that problem goes away.
Could you talk to people in Hawaii from here with like a really high license?
Well, with a technician license, you won't be able to. With a general class license, you can talk to Hawaii every day of the week. That's the purpose of getting the general class license. Okay? You'll see that later on as we get to one of the other sections. Okay, your options would be to change frequencies or reduce your power. That's the other thing you'll find out later on. If someone says, gee, this other station I'm interfering with is on this frequency, oh, well, I can change frequencies. I don't interfere with them. Or sometimes I can just turn my power down. So those are your options. Never set your transmitter exactly at the edge of a frequency band. Well, you'll find out this why later. Okay? It says, so if the edge of the band was, let's say, 1240, and I want to tune my radio, if I went right down to 1240, half of my signal is above 1240 and half of it's below 1240. Well, the part that's below 1240 is technically outside of the band. So you never operate right on the frequency that's the edge of the band, okay? So when you talk, sometimes your signal gets a little wider. So let's say I set my radio on 1241. Yeah, but if I start talking too loud, some of my signal will go down under 1240. In fact, you'll find that a little later. Some transmitters drift in frequency. That radio right there, I have one like this at home, no one's cable. And after I turn it on for about an hour, it's actually changed frequencies. Well, if I'm working down at the low end and it's drifting low, I'd be outside the band. So those are the answers they're trying to get you to understand. Okay, now this is you don't have to memorize any of this. Thank God they just took the questions out of the pool. What happened was, this is general information. There was a class of license called Technician plus Morse. So you got a technician license, and then if you wanted to pass a 5-word-a-minute code test, you got more privileges. And this was them. You say, well, what is it? Well, down in this 80-meter band, there was a little portion of it you could use Morse code, 200 watts. And in this 40-meter band, there was a little section you could use Morse code, 200 watts. And in this band here, the 15, Morse code, 200 watts. In this band, this part of this band, the 10-meter band, Morse code, radio teletype, data mode, 200 watts. But a little bit higher up in frequency, you could use Morse code and single sideband. You say, what's the big deal? Single sideband is a microphone thing. On that band right there, I could talk to Hawaii. Okay? Now, you can do this with your class license. There's no questions about this, okay? So prior to February 2007, there was a thing called Morse plus 5, or Technician plus Morse. But in 2007, the FCC eliminated all the Morse code requirements. There's no more requirements to pass Morse code for any level. So starting then, technicians get these privileges as part of your test, but it's never mentioned in the pool. You'll never ever see it in this pool for some crazy reason. Okay? But there's nothing here to memorize. Okay? Remember that. Yeah.
So if we're in that band,
Yeah.
the one, the bottom one, then we actually can talk to Hawaii?
You're going to find out later. You'll find out later in the section that's called propagation. Okay? That these bands here, this one, and this one, the 15 and the 10, the radio waves go like that. And they go a long ways away. And on given days, you can talk to Hawaii easy. You can talk to England, you can talk to Japan, you can talk to Australia. You'll see this later when we get to that. Okay? And oh, by the way, this right here, that was kind of the carrot for people getting 5 words a minute, so they can start talking farther than 4 or 5 miles. Okay?
Can you still do that, or is it just part of it? It's just part of that now?
Well, these privileges are yours when you get the technician license, but you're not going to use, you will not be using these radios. You'll be using those radios, and you'll see when we get to the section on that.
So if we have a technician license, can we talk to the space station with that? Or do we have to have a general license?
I'm going to give you 2 answers. The answer is yes, you could. Okay? And when we get to the propagation section, you're going to see why. Okay? Go ahead.
How much would a radio cost like that?
Like which one?
So,
Those there run like $800, $900. These guys here run $100 to $300. Okay. Okay. Section 6. Your first radio and emission. Emission is the type of mode we use. Okay. Where am I? Right there. Okay. Again, no questions. I'm going to put that out. This is emissions refer to the method of communication. Am I using Morse code? Is it AM? Is it FM? Is it radio teletype? That's an emission. Okay? Emissions are grouped by categories. These categories and emissions are discussed in the question pool. So the only ones I've really shown you here are the ones that are in the pool. There's dozens and dozens and dozens more. If it's a category called phone, or what I call voice, it's a microphone. It's AM, single side band, FM. And you'll hear more about those. Datas, that's a zeros and ones. There's a one called PAC, a PSK31, whatever that is. Phase shift key, don't worry about these details. Morse code is called CW, continuous wave. Imaging is called television. With your license, you will actually be able to talk to each other using your own television station, if you have the money. Okay? Then there's radio teletype. So let's go. Okay, this is general information. No questions about this. It's just simply how it works. Okay? I got this radio. When I push the transmit button, there's a signal that comes out of the radio. Think of at a certain frequency. So this is higher and this is lower frequencies. And that signal, if I don't talk, if I just push the transmit button, it's referred to as the carrier. Think of it as a pack mule. It's going to carry something, okay? So RF, radio frequency, energy, transmitted at a single frequency is called a carrier. So that's bingo, that's it. The carrier will carry information we wish to transmit. So if it's my voice, it's going to carry somehow my voice to your radio, and then your radio will play my voice off the speaker. So that's what it's all about, okay? So modulation is the process of combining any information with a radio signal carrier for the purpose of communicating information. Okay, definitions, no question. Let's see how Morse code works. Well, I will think him off, but you plug this into the transmitter, and you set the transmitter to the Morse code mode. Now, what you're going to see here is the amount of power coming out of the antenna. So right now, there's no power. If I had this connected, there'd be no power. But when I do this,